Penumbra Overture is a first-person survival horror adventure game created by Frictional Games back in the year 2007. As the developer's debuting title, it would become the first entry in a trilogy of games, as well as help usher in a new age of horror gaming. You see, during the time of the game's release, most horror games became increasingly action-oriented, leaving behind the traditional survival horror gameplay of limited combat, stealth, and puzzle solving. Penumbra Overture was one of the very few games to not follow this trend and became incredibly important for not only keeping the dying genre afloat, but also shaping Frictional Games to become the horror masterminds they are today. Although the game may not be as well designed or scary as its spiritual successor, Amnesia: The Dark Descent, it does contain a great horror atmosphere, along with some spine-chilling moments and a mystery all horror fans should definitely check out.
Your warped sense of morality is better company than I, because now it is all you have left.
Penumbra Overture's story begins in the year 2000, where we play as Philip, who receives a letter from his long-lost and supposed dead father. This letter leads Philip to leave his life behind and travel to an abandoned mine located in northern Greenland in search for his father. Not long after arriving, Philip is soon guided via radio by the memorable and deranged character named Red.
By the way, you can call me Red. It's not my name, you understand, but I am sure you will agree it is a name rather similar to a cardigan. Fetching when worn correctly.
Speaking with a poetic tongue, Red is located deep within the decrepit mine and promises answers once found. Coming ill-prepared for the dangers ahead, Philip must descend underground in order to find Red and uncover his father's secrets. Despite the premise of Philip's adventure being implausible or at least unjustified, the overall story of Penumbra Overture is well written and contains enough mystery to keep most horror fans happy and intrigued. Similar to an old point-and-click adventure game, the player is able to examine the environment, revealing Philip's thoughts using on-screen text. This action becomes an integral part of the game, as it often provides puzzle hints and other bits of lore. Along with the examinability are a scarce amount of collectible notes found within the game world. These notes never provide any concrete or conclusive answers to the mystery, but provide enough information for a good amount of speculation. However, nothing in the game's story compares to our deranged radio companion Red. He is easily one of the best written and voice-acted characters in gaming, providing great storytelling through his rambling mad musings.
How does my brain flesh know your fluids are leaking? Because Red tricked you!
The gameplay of Penumbra Overture is a pure survival horror experience, containing no firearms but a simple blend of exploration, stealth, and a whole lot of puzzle solving. To begin, the player is granted with an inventory to store collected items in, and a couple light sources to use in order to navigate the mine's darkness. Light should be used sparingly though, as it may gather the attention of one of the many undead hounds patrolling around every corner. These dogs serve as the primary threats of the game, along with giant arachnids and an even larger tremor worm from your worst nightmares. More often than not, using stealth and avoiding the dogs is the best option. The player is given a stealth mode which activates when the player is ducking and completely still. The mode will apply a blue tint to the screen, indicating the player is hidden, as well as make things easier to see in the dark. However, this mode does not prevent the player from being detected, as if staring at one of man's ex-best friends will result in Philip having a panic attack. Although the zombie dogs can be avoided by simply staying out of their limited line of sight, there are a couple of collectible items that can be used to distract, trap, or even lay to rest the reanimated Cujos. In addition to stealth and these items, are the game's clunky combat system. Early on in the experience, the player will obtain a few weak and hard to use melee weapons to use to break through barriers and, if worse comes to worst, to defend against the horrors with. Each weapon, along with doors, levers, and other various objects, all use the mouse gesture system. What this means is, if the player wishes to open a door, he or she must hold-click onto the door and physically move the mouse to simulate the motion of opening a door. It's a neat system that not only adds a whole new level of interaction and immersion to the game, but also in turn makes the combat system by design incredibly difficult to use at first. Instead of simply left-clicking to attack, the player must hold-click and either simulate a swipe or stab motion with the mouse in order to perform an attack. This may seem simple on paper, but it does take time getting used to and can introduce some frustration and dire moments. Coupled with this is the weapon's weak damage output, requiring multiple consecutive hits in order to kill an enemy. However, timing the swings of the weapon is also important, as mistiming an attack will allow the spiders to attack again or the dogs to retreat and actually howl for reinforcements. At first, using the weapons will be difficult, but with enough patience and practice, it will soon become second nature. This will ultimately lead to the combat becoming incredibly easy and actually kill the survival horror aspect of the game. This is a big no-no in survival horror games, as enemies should always be an overwhelming threat, where avoidance is the best option to take. Although the enemies in the game are not that terrifying to begin with, minus the Grey Worm from Hell, they should at least require a lot of resources to take down. But unfortunately, in spite of all the efforts to make the combat undesirable, this is where the game's survival horror element ultimately fails, leaving the combat up to the player's skill level when handling the weapons. On the other hand, what the game lacks in combat makes up for with its puzzles. Penumbra Overture is more of a puzzle-solving game than a survival horror one, challenging the player with many obstacles, often requiring multiple steps to accomplish. Some of the collectible notes found within the game world play a large part in communicating how to solve a particular problem to the player. As mentioned earlier, the examinability also has a large part to play, as when examining the environment, certain clues will be revealed and be jotted down in the notebook's to-do list. This list helps organize and give direction to the player if ever stuck with a puzzle, which can happen often. Some puzzles require specific items to be collected from the environment to be used in a certain way, but others require the player's prefrontal cortex to sequence certain steps, or for example, translate Morse code into a door combination. Yeah, you heard right. There's a Morse code puzzle. Another great feature the game makes use of is its physics engine. This allows the player to interact with objects in the environment, granting even more types of puzzles for the player to solve. Physics-based puzzles are something that isn't really done too often, but Penumbra Overture approaches it quite well, utilizing it alongside its aforementioned mouse gesture system to create some very unique scenarios. Retrospectively, the puzzles are not all that unreasonable, with only a couple I'd say are pretty far out. For a first playthrough, the puzzles will definitely pose a challenge, so don't be ashamed to grab a guide if you find yourself spending too long running around the same set of caverns. Now, speaking about time saving, let's talk about the save system. Similar to Call of Cthulhu: Dark Corners of the Earth, Penumbra Overture features an artifact in the game world for the player to interact with in order to save the game. These orange light emitting artifacts are spread throughout the experience, and from my knowledge, though I could be wrong, never say explicitly what they do. Nevertheless, the save system isn't too terrible, as it's coupled with an autosave system, lessening the whole replay of what you just played blow when dying. But if needed, it is possible to modify the game files to give an actual quick save button, so all is not lost. To quickly summarize the gameplay of Penumbra Overture, the survival horror aspect is a bit of a letdown once the player gets comfortable using the weapons, but the puzzle solving will be the real challenge, but not an unfair challenge, as long as the player utilizes the examine and to-do list to the best of their abilities. Graphically speaking, even by 2007, Penumbra Overture is not the prettiest game alive, sporting some blocky geometry with low-resolution textures. In spite of this, however, the game does achieve an excellent horror atmosphere, immersing the player into the dreamlike world underneath the surface. Without resorting to jump scares or other cheap tricks, the game invokes horror through the use of minimal lighting and a brilliant selection of ambient sound effects. Every subtle noise, from the player's footsteps to the hums beneath the player's feet, adds to the intensity of what lies around every corner, creating fear which otherwise wouldn't be present. Another notable mention is to the game's superbly made soundtrack. It often reminds me of the old 90s TV series Are You Afraid of the Dark, and is well made along with the rest of the game's audio. The frame rate of the game is locked at 60 frames per second, meaning if you're like me, you won't be able to enjoy this experience at high refresh rates. Along with this is its lack of controller support, which can be important to some. But apart from this, the game does support 1080p resolutions out of the box, with higher resolutions requiring editing a configuration file in the game's directory. With all that being said, the game may not be the best looking, but with its amazing sound design, it's easy to overlook its graphical shortcomings. In conclusion, it's hard not to recommend Penumbra Overture at least a playthrough or two. The game will take around 6 hours to complete and can be purchased for very cheap along with its 2 sequels. Although the combat system is clunky and can kill the survival horror element to the game, at least it's in the player's control and doesn't necessarily have to be a problem. As for the rest of the experience, it offers a great horror atmosphere, along with challenging puzzles and a well-written story delivered by one of the best written and voice-acted characters in gaming.
You have turned on the light at the end, beginning and middle of the tunnel, but some things remain shrouded in darkness.
Penumbra Overture is definitely a worthwhile experience and will have a lasting impact upon completion, resulting in the need to quickly play the sequel to discover what happens next. Be sure to put on some headphones, play in the dark, and prepare to be absorbed into Philip's journey of survival underneath the surface.